Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be looking once again at Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics, and today will be a walkthrough of Step 8. So, in Step 8, we begin with an exploration of mental wandering, right? Now, in, I believe it was Step 4, we started to look at mental transference, transferring the mind into different objects, and in some other steps into different locations of the body, transfer of consciousness, transfer of mind. And we started to explore what the world looks like from those different perspectives. Now, mental wandering takes this even a little bit further in the sense that over time, we develop the ability to break free of time and space. So because we're working with consciousness, free of time and space, this means there's a definite relationship with the Akasha, which is a funny thing to say, about a paradox. But there is a very clear, strong relationship with the Akasha that must be built in order to do this effectively. So the first exercise that Bardon gives here has to do with mirror work. And if you've ever done mirror work, well, it can be a lot of fun. I like when I've been in hotel rooms that have giant mirrors. My old apartment, I had a really big mirror, and there's a lot of fun you can have with these big mirrors. I like a mirror ideally that's big enough that it eclipses the visual field, which is hard to find. So if you're lucky enough to have something like that on hand, that can be really, really good for this. Ideally, the room is pretty dark in the beginning. Maybe you have a couple of candles that you light behind your body for a little bit of light behind the body so that the flame isn't visible in the mirror. And this will stop any sharp contraction of the eye, right, in relation to the light. So it allows the pupils to stay dilated, and it helps the overall vision to stay wide, open, and expanded, as well as the rest of the sense gates. And of course, from here, your receptivity to energy will be that much more pronounced because you're open. So the first exercise involves looking in a mirror and then observing yourself from the perspective of the mirror, right? And what this starts to open up is a malleability of the mind, right? A malleability of perception. Like when we were exploring with consciousness in relation to observing the world from different centers within the body, etc., etc. Now we're starting to observe the world ourselves, including ourselves, from outside of the body. And this can be painful for some people if you have some very strong habitual tensions in relation to who, what, and how you are and observe the world. There can be this like pressurization, like you're pounding into your own head. With these movements of the mind, it can create these big types of stretches. Some people get headaches. Fatigue is very common. But if we've done the preparatory work and we've strengthened our balancing of the elements and we really worked the equanimity and the Akasha through the astral and mental layers, then this freedom of mind will be that much more easily worked with and explored, right? In the absence of that preparation, the rigidity of mind, if it happens to still be present, will make this process more on the painful side. So make sure you do your prior work so that you can do this without hurting your head. Okay, so observing yourself from outside yourself. And that's where the mirror has its great value. Now, there's many other exercises and ways of using and exploring mirror work. Right now, we're using the mirror specifically for this one purpose. Okay, there's many more ways you can use a mirror, and Bardon goes into some of those later in the book, and you can come up with your own through your own intuition and creativity as you keep progressing on the path. So once you've developed this relationship with the mirror, then you close your eyes, you observe yourself from the perspective of the mirror. Then, of course, at the end of each exercise, you make a strong point of coming back into the physical body, right? Returning the consciousness, the mind back into the body, so you really feel the tangibility of this thing we call the body, right? The reason for this is so that you develop a habit or a practice of returning to form. The further out you go in meditation, right, and out not only in terms of mental wandering in space, but the further refined your alchemical relationship becomes to more and more and more refined energetic substrate and emptiness and akasha, the further away you seem to be from form, right? You are in these states of formlessness. So developing a strong habit of coming back into the body at the end of a practice becomes very important so that you can integrate yourself back together. Okay, we need to be able to ascend to the highest of heights of meditation. We also need to be able to return back into form and over time merge those two states. So this becomes important, coming back to the body. Make sure when you come back, give yourself some pats, remind yourself you have joints. This is where, jumping, sort of more abrupt type physical movements that will stimulate the joint proprioceptors and help you remember where you are in space and that your body's here, okay? So once you've done this, then of course you start exploring the mental wandering from stepping outside your body without the mirror now and observing the space around you and observing yourself from next to you, right? So Bardon does these in little increments so that when you're pushing the perception of the mind and the location of consciousness and identity, you're not pushing too hard or too far, too fast. And this, again, helps us to alleviate potential pains that might arise if we are still needing to cultivate our relationship with the akasha more strongly and with equanimity, etc. Okay, so you step outside the body and you observe from there. Okay, then you start observing the objects in the room, etc. And then you return to the body. Okay, and then your next exercise, step outside and you start walking around the room. Observe your body from a number of different angles and perspectives, right? So this will help to, in a sense, fragment the awareness that we have in a way that allows us to see multiple sides of something at once. Okay, so you can start to see common denominators simultaneously. And this starts to allow us to see and tangibly feel how a thing can be multiple things, right? Which again becomes, depending on where you're looking at it from, which becomes a property of being within the akasha, right? So very, very important, okay? So just walking around the room. Now, Bardon encourages a strong feeling. Even though you are of this timeless, spaceless quality, he encourages a strong feeling of being within what we might call the spirit body as you do this, or the mental body, a tangible mental body as you're doing this. And there's certainly some value into this, to doing this. His reason for this is because it helps you stay grounded. There's one thing that this can cause that's not necessarily so good, is it can sort of expedite a bit of the astral wandering, which can have some negative effects. So he's doing his best, from what I can tell here, to bridge this gap between mental wandering and not going so far, so fast that the body itself can't handle such a stark contrast to the consciousness not being locked into the form of the body. Okay, so there's this, this oscillation, pushing into the freedom without losing too much of the solidity, and you're just exploring and playing with this. So if we don't want to take anything too seriously with a lot of this work, this step is where a lot of people get stuck in this particular initiation. And a big part of getting stuck is that we take things too seriously, which literally creates a massive ceiling and contraction. So openness, expansiveness, ease of perception when it comes to how we view the training is very important. Okay, so because for myself, I found that the tying things too much into the body created some bad habits. So I like to distance that a little more quickly. I found that I had greater progress, and that, of course, my skills rose faster, and that I wasn't experiencing negative physiological side effects from it. So you have to work with your own perceptions of what is happening in you. So you need to have developed strong awareness of the elements and their harmony, physically, vitally, astrally, mentally, so that you can come back into balance and modulate the training and the exploration, in a safe way based off your perceptions of what's happening. Instead of doing what somebody else has told you. So this encourages your own freedom, your own growth, your own sovereignty, your own creativity and intuition. Now, as you start moving further and further from the body here, the spacelessness, the timelessness has to increase so that you're more and more free. And you start exploring further out in your house, in your neighborhood, etc., etc. A really important aspect of this is returning to the body, as we mentioned, being very clear that you're back in the body. And then there are systems of proof. So these would be when you are mental wandering, let's say around your neighborhood, or maybe down a forest trail. What do you observe? And then once you come back to the physical body, do that same little walk in the physical body and observe what was there. Now, remembering that time and space end up collapsing on themselves in this, because we're working timelessly and spacelessly, the space of what you observe might be different. You might see a giant tree, huge giant tree. All these specific details. But then when you walk with your physical body and physical eyes, that tree might not be there. Maybe it's a rock, whatever. But there might be an identical tree that's really small, or an identical rock or shape in the ground or root that's identical but super tiny. Maybe a grain of sand, maybe still a seed. Remember, time and space flux. Now, this is an easy way to delude ourselves, so you have to be very open and aware to the precise, the specificity of the landmarks, so that if the size is diminished or expanded, you can still see the direct correspondence, right? And remembering that time is in flux, so especially if you're in the Akasha, you might be walking down a trail, you might see past influence on the trail or future influence on the trail, and this is something to become, again, more aware of. So then we get to further down the line of this training, the walking in areas or mental wandering to places you've never been, towns you've never been, mental wandering in the blip of an eye to other places on the planet, and bang, you're there, just through choice. The faster than the speed of light is the mind. So bang, you're there, and you start observing. but you've never been there before and you don't really have a way of proof of concept once you're there, because it's tricky to hop on a plane and go explore Antarctica. But the way that you test this is, can you change what it is you're perceiving? So can you use your imagination instead of the mental wandering? And if your relationship to the imagined immediate changes that you make with the imagination, if that's the same as what you're experiencing when you're mental wandering, then it's a good indication that both the mental wandering is a fabrication of the mind, in the same way that the imagined alteration is a fabrication of the mind. So the place from which you do these exercises, the refined relationship to energy and the freedom of the mind, is very, very important, right? The place from which we act, from which we explore these exercises, matters. Okay, and that is one of the big differences between working through this type of stuff in a way that increases the strength of our delusion, our capacity for delusion, to create it ourselves and to believe it. Right? So that's something we gotta watch out for that. Are we strengthening our delusion, or are we strengthening the freedom of the mind and the freedom of our relationship to reality? And it's a tricky thing. So from where you act matters. You have to be able to attain certain relationships with meditation to be able to do this more and more thoroughly and cleanly. Okay? Now, there's a lot of value in exploring the unknown, because you have to be open to form arising and succeeding, and for stuff coming in, coming out. We can't have imposed preferences on what is and isn't there, right? Because then we are mental wandering to see what we want to see, which is again a short path to strong delusion. The biggest value in mental wandering is, once again, this liberating of the mind shape, creating mental flexibility and freedom, so that we can then, as we progress further and further on this spiritual path, we can mentally transfer the consciousness to different spheres of influence, the planetary spheres, the elemental planes, planetary spheres, constellational harmonics and star systems, etc. You can mentally transfer into frequencies, transfer the consciousness into deities, and work with deity yoga. There's just relationship after relationship after relationship with further practice that comes from this skill. Okay, now an exercise that Bardon doesn't give here, which I found fun, and I learned this from Tom Brown Jr.'s Tracker School and some of his philosophy courses. And he passed away recently. He had some really interesting meditative and spiritual systems and exercises. One of them was splitting yourself. So just like you can step out of your body over time and the mental body starts to wander and you observe your body from different angles, from different places, you observe the room. You can also split your mind, your consciousness, and fragment it into, start with 2. So instead of stepping out of your body with one mental body, you step out with 2 mental bodies, and you observe yourself from 2 places simultaneously, right? Walk around the room, observe the room from multiple places simultaneously, around your house. Walk around your neighborhood, mental wandering, with 2 points of perception simultaneously. Okay, and then, continue. And then you would do this, 3, 4, 5, see how far you can get. We want to be careful of not breaking ourselves. If you're doing this, be very, very clear to come back thoroughly, integrate those separations back into the body fully and completely. Very, very important. Okay, this becomes very valuable further down the line when we want to have a strong relationship with multiple planes simultaneously, multiple dimensional-esque experiences simultaneously, have a relationship with multiple different energies and frequencies simultaneously. And working harmony from multiple perspectives requires the ability of the mind to break free in a bunch of different ways. So mental wandering is a key cornerstone to this freedom, this liberation of the mind in relation to all kinds of spiritual work. Okay? So that's something that Bardon doesn't discuss, but something I found very useful. Now, once again, the place from which you do these exercises, the frequencies that you are merging with when you do this make a big difference. If you are trying to work these types of exercises with no equanimity from a lower egoistic type of mind, you will run into usually some issues, not only from the delusion standpoint, but also, of course, from the pain standpoint and potentially from the breaking your brain standpoint. Okay, so the ability to embrace the unknown, this keeps the mind free and open. Okay, and there's a lot to be said for a sense of sacredness. All these things that, if we're exploring this stuff from more scientific perspectives, people might kind of like shove off to the side, go, oh, that's like mystical, whatever, that's unnecessary. If you do these things, you get to this place. It doesn't require any sacredness, any reverence, any of these things, humility. But these qualities of spiritual connection, these have embedded in them states of mind and relationships to oscillation and flexibility of the bodies, the matrices, all these things that are very difficult to concoct outside of the depths of spiritual reverence, sacredness, quietude. These become very important. In any type of like imposition of scientific understanding onto the spiritual arts, it's very easy to think that we know better. Oh, well, I have this knowledge, therefore, I'm better. Knowledge is power, right? And then people get attached to the knowledge, attached to the ideas of what's happening. But the actual meditative foundation, to be able to focus, to integrate, to merge and unify with different substrates of energy, to have this deep reverential experience, sacred experience, and not just the experience, but the actual qualities that we are merging into, the selflessness, the dissolution of self. There's so much happening that to try to compartmentalize it or reduce it to one small fragment can be a pretty big folly and will hold us back, right? It's very difficult to observe or connect with the infinite from the space of the finite. Okay, all the finite things are merely fragmented facets of the whole, right? So as we're able to touch into the whole more and more thoroughly, we're able to start to, with a free mind and perception, start to see how some of those facets come together, right? But if we try to look at one facet in the absence of the entire spiritual gem, using this metaphor, there's no gem. The facet disappears. You can't look at a facet in the absence of the thing that it's a part of. Or you can, but the thing that you're looking at, well, it's you're robbing it of almost all of itself. So something to be aware of as you're exploring this. And if you're interested in training, please check out the website. We have a Tai Chi program, a Qi Gong, Hermetic magic, and meditation program. and a Q&A video reference library where I get videos up for any questions you might have on the content. And also, if you're interested in in-person training, I offer private coaching, and we have a 16-day retreat coming up in June 2025 here in BC, Canada. All right, hope to see you there. Bye.